Yep. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ravindranath Goswami, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's proceedings. We do apologize for the delayed start. We had some technical issues. However, I think they have all worked out. Welcome to our distinguished panelists, who shall be introduced shortly. We are very grateful for each panelist having agreed to participate and to give of his or her time and expertise in today's discussion. Welcome to all attendees in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, as well as globally, that are viewing the live stream via YouTube. We appreciate your company this evening. Please feel free to share the live. This event is being recorded and will be made available for subsequent review, as well as to facilitate persons who are not able to view live. Today's virtual panel discussion recognizes two very significant events being observed during the month of May. React Month is celebrated internationally by all React teams to recognize the efforts of membership and their achievements, and to have a forward-looking view for the organization. Just to note, this year, 2022, React International Incorporated, headquartered in Glendale, California, celebrates 60 years. A special celebration event is to be held in Las Vegas during the month of August to mark the Diamond Jubilee. The NDPPM, or the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month, as declared by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and executed by several stakeholders led by the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, ODPM, is also being observed in the month of May. We acknowledged the partnership with the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, TEMA, as well as HeartLight TV, the streaming provider for today. REACT is the Radio Emergency Associated Communications Teams, a voluntary non-profit organization that provides assistance in times of emergencies and disasters, working closely with first responder organizations and partners. Not only in crisis times, the organization also provides assistance for public service projects, including cultural, sporting, and other activities in which communications and logistics are critical success factors. Radio communications technology is the mainstay of the organization's operations. Continual preparation of its people via training, exercises, drills, and projects form part of the organization's ethos. REACT works closely with several stakeholders, some of whom are represented on the panel this evening, as the organization pursues its role in disaster risk reduction. It is by no accident that REACT Month activities in Trinidad and Tobago and that of the NDPPM occur just before the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season. We, as global citizens, have a key role to play in disaster risk reduction. Planning, strategizing, exercising, drilling, training, collaborating, cooperating, and having such discussions as we are about to engage are all part of our readiness in order to minimize the impact of the many hazards we face. Whether it's hurricanes, earthquakes, terrorism, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, or other hazards, we must have an all hands on deck, all hazards, and all of society approach. Collaboration and cooperation among agencies and stakeholders become critical. Arising out of discussions with the NDPPM Secretariat last year, led by the CEO of the ODPM, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, REACT is pleased to partner with the ODPM for a second year in hosting today's virtual panel discussion, Women in Emergency Communications and Disaster Risk Reduction. The topic of gender, as we are keenly all aware, is a key issue across all spheres of humanity, whether it is in relation to human rights, equal opportunity, or simply the need for organizations to have a well-developed and comprehensive gender policy, including an implementation plan and review cycle, or whether it is simply keeping the issue on the strategic agenda. The process starts with discussion. This forum presents an opportunity to discuss this critical issue in the context of emergency communications, or Emcomms, and disaster risk reduction, DRR, from the perspective of our practitioners. The International Telecommunications Union, ITU, development sector published a groundbreaking report in 2020 entitled Women, ICT and Emergency Telecommunications, Opportunities and Constraints. A key finding in the report suggests that closing the gender divide can save lives in emergencies, including pandemics. An example statistic quoted refers to the victims of cyclones occurring in Bangladesh for the year 1991, and a startling revelation that 90% of them were women. Clearly, there is imbalance and action is required. Some of the issues highlighted in the report are sure to be peered into this evening, given that the head or the lead author of the report is a panelist. As you saw in the short opening TikTok video at the start of the stream, provided courtesy of TEMA, women play a key role in disaster management. In case you missed it, it will be replayed at the end of the program. As we speak, this weekend, cleanup campaigns are ongoing in various municipal corporations, and CERT and shelter managers are being exercised via simulation events, and women can be seen serving with excellence. The multidisciplinary panelists with diverse backgrounds and experiences bring a wealth of knowledge that no doubt will make for an interesting and thought-provoking exploration of the matter. Attendees may send in questions to the panel via the YouTube live chat feature, SMS text, or WhatsApp to 1-868-74-REACT. That is 747-3228. We will have a ticket tape with those that number so that you will have access to it during the course of the program. We welcome your questions, even hard questions. Should we encounter any major technical difficulties or other issues that affect the program, we will attempt to recover. However, if we are unable to do so in about 5 minutes, we will seek to reschedule. In terms of our proceedings, each panelist shall be introduced, followed by a short presentation of their thoughts regarding our topic for the evening, Women in Emergency Management and Disaster Risk Reduction. Each panelist will select the perspective from which they choose to approach the discussion, and it should be Women in Emergency Communications and Disaster Risk Reduction as our topic. After all panelists have made their opening statements, we shall engage the panel in some further conversation, followed by questions from the attendees. We encourage you to ask questions or make comments. Lastly, I must also declare up front that you would find us operating somewhat informally during the proceedings. Having said that, let's go on with it. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist. Dr. Kim Mallalieu is leader of the Communications Systems Group in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of the West Indies and Deputy Chairman of the Board of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, TAT. As a keen advocate for gender equality for development, her works include the ITU ETC report on women, ICT, and emergency telecommunications. She is a licensed amateur radio and GMDSS short-range operator and a member of Radio Emergency Associated Communications Teams, REACT Team 2496. I welcome Kim for your comments.
Many thanks, Robbie, and all partner agencies responsible for hosting today's panel discussion. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a few thoughts and always thrilled to engage with friends and colleagues around three areas of my keen interest: women, communications, and disaster risk management. My topic statement today, Robbie, is a call to action for all of us to do our part to ensure that emergency communications and disaster risk reduction are most effective. What does that mean? It means that all stages of the communications life cycle and the disaster risk management life cycle must draw on all necessary inputs for greatest effect. A key input to both life cycles is, of course, human resources. And there is not only opportunity, but there is need for men and women to participate equally through all stages of both. What do I mean by equally? Well, this is a good time to review the key concepts of equality, equity, and inclusion. Equality is a principle that refers to non-differentiated access to rights, freedoms, autonomy, and agency. It does not refer to sameness. We are well aware that men and women are different. My husband and I are classic cases. As aggravating as our differences are to both of us, we are thankful for and celebrate them. Gender equality does not mean that we are the same. It means that we enjoy non-differentiated access to rights, freedoms, autonomy, and agency. Equity is a principle that extends the principle of equality. It is grounded in justice, giving all persons their just due, upholding fairness, respect, and absenting coercive interference. Inclusion is the process by which efforts are made to ensure equal opportunities, that everyone, regardless of their backgrounds, can achieve their full potential in life. Such efforts include policies and actions that promote equal access to opportunities and enable all to participate in the decision-making processes that affect their lives. So back to the life cycles. The communications life cycle is rich and varied. It includes basic and applied research, design, innovation, development, deployment, maintenance, and support, as well as a host of other activities such as analysis and presentation, and on and on. The disaster risk management life cycle comprises all of the activities, many activities that are essential for mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. And of course, both rely on an enabling environment that it includes, but is not limited to, policy and regulation. Yet, in 2022, that is this year, only 33% of researchers worldwide are women, and they account for only 28% of engineering graduates, according to the GCRF, Global Challenges Research Fund. Also, only 25% of students in engineering and information and communications technology, ICT, are women in many countries around the world. So says the UNESCO of this year, 2022. So now let's consider disasters. Robbie made mention. Studies of Asian cyclones, European heat waves, and hurricanes in the Americas show women and children are disproportionately impacted by natural disasters. However, the tools to help them mitigate, prepare for, and recover from disasters are often designed by men. Recall that only 25% of students in engineering and ICT are women in many countries around the world. The impact of this is that women's needs are often left unaddressed at all stages of the communications life cycle. Giselle, I wonder if Giselle is on the call today. I hope she is. Giselle, one of our local amateur radio operators, was often participated in disaster recovery programs around the Caribbean, has shared with me that in her experience, women victims of disasters are most comfortable with women relief agents. And this, of course, is at a time when they are most vulnerable. Giselle has also shared with me the challenges of gender bias that she has personally experienced as a woman volunteer until she has proven herself with the staggering depth and breadth of her competence and spirit. Giselle is in the minority. On a quick count of the amateur operator registry as at the 1st of March 2022, publicly available on the website of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, 27 of 241 licensed operators in this country are women, 11%. I believe that the amateur radio community in the Caribbean would stand to gain from gender balance. Other regions and countries have recognized this need. The American Amateur Radio League, ARRL, runs a young ladies radio league to encourage women in amateur radio. The Radio Club of America, RCA, has created a new wireless women section on its website to assist women considering careers in wireless and to encourage them to get involved in technology. There is a Canadian Ladies Amateur Radio Association, and on and on. Up to a couple of years ago, React International, as I understand it, had no women officers, board directors, or assistant directors. I do not know if this has changed. Its global membership then comprised 30% women. I am thrilled that the president of our local React team 2496 is a woman, the first ever for the team, and you will hear from her today. I believe that React and other communications-based organizations in disaster risk management would stand to gain from gender balance. Here are some of the factors that are barriers to women pursuing careers in STEM in the first instance. Paucity of mentors, paucity of female role models in the field, gender bias and derogatory behavior in the workplace, which is quite widespread, unequal growth opportunities with male co-workers, and lower wages for the same position. You see, if you remember my call for action, there is room for all of us to play a role. And here are some here. Mentors, role models for each and every human being on the planet to examine him or herself, his or herself, about gender bias. Even those among us who feel that we carry no biases, dig deeper. Think, see, explore, examine. And if it is that you find that you have gender bias or any other bias for that matter, If it is that you reflect and find that you, on occasion or regularly, exhibit derogatory behavior in the workplace, then you have a role to play. If you are responsible for unequal growth opportunities for men and women, or lower wages for women for the same position, then you have a role to play. Often in life, there are explicit strategies that we must employ to change historical biases, insecurities, and culture. Recognizing the need for equity and inclusion, all international and many national agencies, as Robbie has mentioned, have adopted diversity and inclusion policies to ensure equal access to and equitable treatment of women. Perhaps it is time for our radio and DRM agencies and organizations who haven't yet done so to consider the adoption of such policies. There are many who would be happy to help. Personally, I would like to recognize Dr. Sue-Ann Barrett, the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, IGDS, at the University of the West Indies. She has generously given of her time to help the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of the West Indies understand gender justice to make us better people and a more effective department. We have just started our journey. I would like also to thank REACT International and the local chapter, as well as ODPM, HeartLight TV, TEMA, NDPPM, fellow panelists, and our audience for the opportunity to share thoughts today. And happy 60th and birthday, REACT. Back over to you, Robbie.
Thank you very much, Kim. Wow, what an excellent intro into our topic this evening. Very wide-ranging indeed, dealing with many definitions to clarify some of these issues for us, as well as speaking to the life cycles involved in communication and disaster management. And certainly we do recognize many of the challenges indicated, especially those in relation to gender bias, and of course the importance of policy, that we must do something about it, and in your words, a call to action. Excellent indeed, Kim. So we move next to our second panelist. Allan Stewart is a disaster and emergency management professional. He has over 30 years of experience as a radio operator and is a past director of REACT Tobago. Allan started his career at the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, TEMA, in 1999 as the assistant coordinator, and today is at the helm, holding the position of director. It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Allan.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, to warmly congratulate the Radio Emergency Associated Communications team for this very important undertaking. Only a couple months ago, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations recognizing World's Women's Day. If my memory serves me correct, that was held on the 8th of March, 2022. But one of the interesting angles of the topic lend itself to what is happening globally in terms of equity, and Kim would have paid attention very distinctively in terms of the gender inequalities that exist. But what this year's topic sought to speak to was that gender inequalities and its relation to climate change and its impact. And there, ladies and gentlemen, this is where my subject and my focus will be in terms of looking at those inequalities, some particular the disparities that exist in when you look at the disaster management. So you will allow me to to speak to those issues. So let me begin by saying that as it relates to women in the field of emergency communications, I myself, being a radio enthusiast, have learned quite a lot and observed the abilities and come to recognize the abilities of our women as they played that significant role in telecommunications. And it's one of the hallmarks, and it was cited by earlier speakers speaking about the ITU, the International Telecommunications, and how they made their observation throughout the year coming through. I want to lend some thought to the disaster management cycle because, Robbie, in my years of being here at TEMA, the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, and my own observation, I wish to bring to this discussion today for those of you who are viewing on Facebook or on YouTube. I want to bring to your reality as we look inside of disaster management cycle. Now, one way asked, when you speak to the issue of the disaster management cycle, what's the relevant and what exactly is that? We are speaking about, it is said that the disaster management cycle consists of 4 to 5 major areas. And I will just want to cite 3 of them for now. But I should go, you will agree if I go through the 5 of them. Preparedness, prevention, response. Some people speak to mitigation as well, and also the recovery effort. Now, these 5 areas are divided into 3 phases. And in those 3 phases, you will want to identify with elements of the cycle that points to these phases before, during, and after an event. Now, on the particular subject, my observation over the years is that our women folks do well, very well, in the area of the first phase of the cycle and the latter part of the cycle. You see them very evident. And my colleague King would have pointed out her own view as it relates to inequities and also inequalities that may render this truth that is we have experienced over the years. So let me dig a little deep into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim would have spoke about even the tools that are made available, that they are made by men and sometimes designed for men without women in mind. It is my observation that there is something that we need to address as it relates to the inequalities and inequities that exist in the cycle of disaster management. If I were to present a paper, my thesis argument will be that there is a huge disparity as it relates to the disaster cycle and the role of women in the disaster management construct, so to speak. So walk with me a little bit. Firstly, what I want to point out that when we talk about disaster preparedness, you will find a huge amount of women presenting themselves. You will find that a huge amount of women are in the field of disaster preparedness. They exist. You see them there. But when you move on to disaster response, it is my evidence and my viewpoint and my experience that is where you see things are not cut in a manner to facilitate, or you will not see that heavy lifting area of the disaster management system allowing for women to function effectively in the field. Now, while I'm saying I want to be very careful because it may come across a bit controversial, especially if you look at some of the fields in disaster management. In a disaster management system, what you have in disaster risk reduction, you have things like what we do for in relation to preparedness. For example, you do education programs, you do lectures, you go into the communities based on the what is set out in the Sendai framework as allowing communities to be beings. And therefore, you will find large numbers of women in these particular areas. They are there. Now, but there is something I want you to closely examine with me, where I'm pointing this argument. There's a huge disparity as it relates to gender, and that happens to be in the area of emergency response. Now, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, viewers, wherever you may be, cite with me that when it comes to the area of wages, it is heavily found in the area of disaster response, that element of the cycle. For example, firemen, the people who do the road clearance, the people who go out there and cut the trees. And while we at the Tobago Emergency Management Agency have sought to, through our CERT program, have quite a lot to in the inclusion of women into that element of the community response emergency teams, I am not sure that enough has been done on a wider scale to allow women to participate in a very meaningful way. Now, I'm using the word loosely here, allowed. And while factually the term used may not be able to be easily justified, and in the selection criteria, one sometimes don't just look for gender, but more look for the suitability in terms of the tasking to be undertaken. And therefore, in each job market, the requirements for the job specs are well set out. And therefore, but I cannot overemphasize that the disparity is very evident if you were to look at disaster preparedness and what uptakes in disaster prevention. For example, if you go to the communities, ladies and gentlemen, right now, and you decide to go to a community center to speak about disaster preparedness, the hallway will be filled with women. On another note, I mentioned in the cycle, there's another part that speaks to recovery and relief. If you look at within what happens in that element post of the impact of any hazard and its impact on a community itself, you will find again where shelters are, they're heavily manned by women. Now, let me bring it home, ladies and gentlemen. What you will observe if you pay attention carefully, that these are all, most of them, voluntary activities. Let me repeat that again. When we look at what obtains in the disaster preparedness with lectures and going into communities and walking about, all these activities are activities that are voluntary. So when I make the point about the disparity in the system, it is evident that in the areas in the disaster management cycle where activities related to preparedness and prevention, where these are all volunteer activities. When you go to the areas of emergency response, these are paid, professionally paid services that they are exchange of wages for these activities, and that you find a slim amount of women are participating in this area, and this is where you find the difficulties for them to even manage that aspect of it, because even tools, gloves, face masks, things like that are not designed with the women folks in mind. The circumference of a pickaxe and things like that. The heavy lifting stuff is really the areas that you find that these are paid areas, and you find the scale tilt towards the men in this particular area. That has been my observation. When you go to another area that obtains quite a lot of volunteerism as it relates to the management of shelters and things like that, you find that there is a large uptake of women participating in these areas as well. In the Emergency Operations Center, where you find there is a bit of softer skills that is required, for example, data management, the rudiments of emergency distribution of information, and also communications, and the working of within the Emergency Operations Center itself. In the ops rooms, you will find a huge amount of women as well availing themselves for these tasks. And to be fair to the discussion, these are also paid jobs. So you will want to, in finalizing my statement in the disparity, I can see easily the need for allowing greater input. I myself have made the argument that it is imperative that we consider wages for persons who are involved in the areas that we deem to be volunteer. For example, there is a high expectation that shelters should be open, and therefore, is it fair for them to manage shelters free? Is it fair? So these are some of the disparities that are very in the disaster management system, ladies and gentlemen. And I will pause there now, and I think I have placed enough on the table that can spark a particular type of, whether it's good arguments or discussions or questioning. Robbie, I think that's it from me in terms of the disparity as it relates to disaster management in the disaster management cycle, as we speak about communications, emergency communications, and the role of women in the whole aspect of what is known as the DRM, the disaster risk management. Thank you.
Allan, thank you so much. Excellent intro to the topic, indeed. And you started by recognizing 8th of March as the UN declared World Women's Day. And of course, you took us into the challenges that women encounter, with the huge disparity in the various stages of the disaster management cycle. And, from what you're saying, that from a practical standpoint, this has been observed in disaster management organizations, and that there's a skew towards volunteerism on the preparedness and prevention side. But on the other side, where we're talking about gainful employment on the EOC and the response side, there are some challenges, some of which appear to be systemic in your view, what you have put to us. I think you have painted a clear picture. So with that, we come to our next panelist. Lisa Henzell has worked in emergency management for just over 10 years. She is a former secretary of REACT Trinidad and Tobago Council, as well as REACT Team 2496. She currently holds the position of president of REACT Team 2496. Lisa works in emergency communications with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government at the Diego Martin Regional Corporation. She also volunteers with organizations such as ODPM, EMAT, and Red Cross. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Robbie. It's an honor to be here as part of this panel. And after listening to Kim and Allan, I could tell you something. We definitely all work in the same field because we have definitely researched under the same information, data, detail. You're going to hear it in my upcoming presentation. Let me start by congratulating REACT on the 60-year anniversary this year. What an achievement. I would also like to congratulate REACT for partnering with the ODPM and the other committee members of the NDPPM because it's something that Trinidad has been definitely in need of for many, many years. Point is, we have finally taken this step forward. So good evening to you, Mr. Moderator, the panelists, and to all of those attending on this informative webinar here today. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to speak on these subjects that can so often be ignored and overlooked in the heat of the matters. I'm honored to sit with such an esteemed body of contributors and being able to speak to the awareness and importance of women being recognized in emergency communications and disaster risk reduction. I'd like to start with women in emergency communications. I've been in the field of emergency communications for, as Robbie said, just about 10 years now. And I joined REACT 2496 by force when the then president brought a form, put it in front of me, and showed me where to sign. Well, the rest is history. I'm still here and I'm still fighting the cause. I'm also employed as a communications technician with the Disaster Management Unit in the Diego Martin Regional Corporation through the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. So it's safe to say that emergency communications is a big part of my everyday life. As a woman working on the field today, my opinions have come full circle in recognizing the value of women. In my earlier experiences, I found it a treacherous road in my contributions being included and considered. Maybe my vision has been cleared with the experiences under my belt up till now. But I do find that in emergency communications, women have finally reached a point of being able to excel at the task with almost equal recognition for their participation, contributions, and know-how. It has been proven many times over that women have the ability to access and relay information in record time. We all know about that one. The fact that women are key to building resilience and confidence makes them critical in partnership building. In emergency communications, accuracy, clarity, precise delivery, and data confidentiality are categories that can be guaranteed from women on and in this field. I have worked alongside many that have shown strength and character, gentle recourse and compromise, and have done it all with the grace that calms the sometimes chaotic situation. Women have finally been able to shine in the scientific and ICT side of emergency communications, where equipment, research, tools, and creativity take the lead in times of disaster. I have had the privilege of working alongside some women that have participated as an equal among the men on their teams and have been able to create and contribute on level footing. Still though, there is a strong divide blocking women from crossing through that gender barrier and becoming equal stakeholders. And as Robbie and Kim both identified that article, that it is clearly stated that was published by the International Telecommunications Union in 2020, women, ICT, and emergency telecommunications, opportunities, and constraints. It's also important to remember that communication is the key consideration in disaster events of humanitarian and disaster risk reduction professionals. This was also pointed out in another article in my research, the role of gender in disasters, communications, and its importance in the post-2015 framework written by Mr. Kevin Blanchard in 2015, just before the launch of the Sendai framework. This point clearly links communications and disaster risk reduction. The inquisitive nature of a woman's thought patterns, too, often is reflected in their timely response mechanisms, in recognizing that in most instances they have researched the situation prior to the impact. In the task of my volunteering with REACT, I have found that women have not been active as the men. And there are many things that can contribute to that being so. As mentioned before by Allan and by Kim, it could be the gender divide with regards to the work portfolio, platforms, equality in policies. It could also be the amount of things that women really and truly have to do in a day. And sometimes they just don't have the time for heavy volunteering. But once again, it will be covered in many aspects with regards to women not being equally recognized or as present in emergency communications and disaster risk reduction abilities or in the presence on the field. The ability to organize, schedule, inform, express, multitask, plan, liaise, manage communications during incidents and events. They can stand ahead of the class. There's no doubt about that, and I think we can all recognize that. So I could go on and on about emergency communications, but I want to touch a little bit on disaster risk reduction. So let me go there. The immediate situation as it relates to climate change, once again mentioned by my two fellow panelists, has brought disaster risk reduction to every doorstep. The awareness and severity and force of disasters has exaggerated the impacts of disasters today and has led to the enhanced recognition of disaster risk reduction. In working in this realm, it still amazes me how complacent the majority of the population are in realizing how serious this threat is of severe impact to all of mankind. In my research, I came across another article in a small country in the Pacific that was also mentioned, I think, by Robbie as well as Kim, that has recognized the importance of women in disaster risk reduction. The article that I read, how meteorology is bringing women or helping women lead in disaster response in Vanuatu, the name of the country. That was written by Lisa Cornish and published in 2020, February. This article in particular amplifies the fact that women are often the ones responsible for their families. And I feel safe to assume that that is the same here in Trinidad and Tobago, and probably in the rest of the world. However, it states that they still remain separate from the roles of leadership in preparing for and responding to disasters. The article also refers to the World Risk Report of 2019, which was published by the Institute for International Law and Peace and Armed Conflict, in emphasizing that by building leadership for women, this is essential in preparing communities in Vanuatu for disasters. The theme of the International Women's Day, once again repeated, I'm going to repeat it again because it was all in my research, mentioned by Kim and Robbie. Women's Day celebrations this year, the theme for 2022 was also called Achieving Gender Equality in the Context of Climate Change, Environment, and Disaster Risk Reduction Policies and Programs. So we're seeing that women's names are getting called all over. Women are the key community actors in promoting, mobilizing, and preparing communities for the inevitable when it comes to disaster. It's easy to assume that they already stand as the proprietors and the key contributors to reducing risk and vulnerability in their environments, heightened in my own observations. I'd like to stress that now in 2022, it is time for us to celebrate equality. And in our own communities and environments, we can start amplifying its importance in the way forward. The sentiments will then spread its wings and show that in fields of emergency communications and disaster risk reduction, positivity and strengths of both genders can come together and work together and lead humanity to heightened resilience. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the privilege of being able to give this contribution today.
Excellent indeed, Lisa. Wow. So what we're seeing here is a very common thread from all of our panelists, because Lisa has also highlighted the challenges that women face in emergency management, and she has, of course, seen it firsthand as a practitioner. And of course, the importance and criticality of emergency communications, and enunciating that, you know, women certainly bring to the table that skill set and capability. And of course, Lisa has enumerated several of the characteristics of women. So I guess though some progress might have been made over time, certainly it appears a huge barrier still exists, and we definitely need to do much more and to go much further. Lisa also highlighted climate change exacerbating the impact of disasters, and therefore the prominence and our reference to disaster risk reduction, or DRR, that is talked about quite a bit in all spheres of emergency management these days. Of course, we picked up again across all of our speakers, and Lisa certainly enunciated it as well, the importance of achieving gender equity. So folks, very soon on your screen you will have the information in terms of how you can ask questions. We have had some comments already on the YouTube live stream, and we say welcome to all who have joined, and thank you so much for the various comments. So at this time, we have a couple of questions we'll pose to the panelists. Of course, they're free to elect or select who would like to take the question, and of course it's open to all. And then if we have any questions from our attendees, either via WhatsApp or via the YouTube chat, we will present those questions. So again, YouTube chat, it's simply to type the question or comment there, as well as the SMS, text, or WhatsApp. The number is 1-868-74-REACT. So that's how you can also reach the panelists to make your comment or ask your question. So we do encourage the questions, and we're not doing too badly on time. So for our panelists, given what you have said, given your various perspectives, given the situation that has been well espoused by all three of you, we want to ask the question: what opportunities might exist for women, and in particular young women, who are interested in the fields of emergency communications and an area of disaster risk reduction, or perhaps both? What opportunities exist? Our panelists.
I guess I could start the ball.
Yeah, sure, come.
Yeah, well, Robbie, to answer that question, I would throw back some questions to those interested. Yeah, because I think that opportunities exist at all. This is my opinion, right? This is my opinion. I believe that there are opportunities that exist at all phases in the communications life cycle, and as I mentioned before, that is from contemplation, research, design, write-up, implementation, blah blah blah, all the way up to deployment, maintenance, and support. as well as in the disaster risk management cycle. And both Allan and myself have talked about those stages. So I believe, one, that opportunities exist. Before I give some examples, I believe that opportunities exist at all phases of both life cycles for women interested. I believe that quite apart from the levels, in the stages in the cycles, I believe that there are opportunities for women of all levels. So there are opportunities for women who are functionally illiterate, and for the whole cycle of literacy, the whole hierarchy, let's say, of literacy. It is not that you need to have a university degree to participate and to have opportunity and to access opportunities. I also believe that it's important to understand that opportunities exist and should be seized, both for, let us say, mentors and mentees, those wishing to develop themselves, as well as those wishing to help others develop themselves. So some of the opportunities, the key thing really is community. In my mind, the key thing is community. So the first thing I would do if a woman came to me and said that she's interested, but she doesn't know where to start, I would say, find a community of practice, a community of interest. It could be a club, it could be a group of friends who have a common interest, it could be in an association. So that is the first starting point, I think, for opportunity, is to find a community and to grow in that community. Another is that there are tremendous amount of training opportunities, both certification-based and not, that are freely available on the net. How do you sift through that? Again, I would reach out to somebody and ask, of all of these things in the world that are available, where do I start? And to do that, to get that guidance, there are many people, women interested, young girls interested, could reach out to Robbie, to Allan, to Lisa, to myself, and a whole plethora of other people happy to help. There are also opportunities, especially for women now, in ICT and also in disaster risk management. There are opportunities for scholarships. There is a significant interest of mine. I'll just say this last sentence because I know I've taken too much. A significant interest of mine is youth advocacy, is to hear the voice of youth at policy fora, at regulatory fora, at technical fora. In less than 2 weeks, there are a number of UE students who will be traveling to Rwanda to participate in a youth summit. This is a youth summit hosted by the International Telecommunication Union, just on the eve of the World Telecommunication Development Conference. So what I'm saying to you is that there are opportunities of all sorts. But I know that I've talked too much, so I'm going to hand back over to the other panelists for the time being, Robbie.
Excellent indeed, Kim. A very comprehensive answer, and you have actually answered one of the questions posed by Carlton in the YouTube chat. So very, very comprehensive response. So Allan, Lisa, would you care to chime in on the question of opportunities?
Well, I think in all fairness to the discussion, even with where my arguments would have take us down a particular path, I want to reiterate that not all is lost. Fairly, as it relates to career choices in emergency management, there is a field element, one of which you see intake, of this field element speaks to life and limb, the protection of life and limb, emergency response, for example, EMTs. A number of females are going in that direction where to be emergency medical technicians. But and I could go on, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, which have a USAR team. A number of some of these females are also involved. And when I say USAR, I'm speaking about urban search and rescue operations. They are heavily involved in that as well. The military, very, very involved, especially the core of the that deals with the civil engineering corps of the Defense Force. A number of them are involved as well. I mentioned in my discussions the Emergency Operations Center, which is the centerpiece of the coordination hub of disaster management. And I always make reference to the four P's, the four C's, sorry, and the one P, which are pillars of emergency management. We speak about command and control and also coordination. And last but not least, which I think is critically important, is that of communications. Again, communications, the EOC, the construct of the Emergency Operations Center survives on communications. In other words, the information management through the suite of ICT products today. And the telecommunications department, I could tell you from an ICT perspective, a number of people, when they hear the term ICT, their minds go straight to computers. But I hasten to, being a practitioner and a user of these ICT products, point out that ICT speaks to the whole toolkit, speaks to the whole range of the spectrum of the telecommunication cache. And therefore, it's important for women to understand that these are areas that you can really make well. Some of the higher paying jobs here at TEMA, in the area of the ICTs, networking, which is a serious part of the telecommunication infrastructure in terms of the use of computer devices and other ICT tools. These are very well paid areas, so one wishing to consider those areas. And then if I were to use the ICS model, which is the incident command system, in each of the foray of areas, for example, accounting, the accountability of items that in terms of procurement for the areas, these areas are hold a heavy interest for women as well. Also, the operations room in terms of data management and how you input data and how you do your call outs and assigned reports to varying responding agencies. Again, these are areas that women certainly can find themselves very comforted. Robbie, I think I should close by saying this. I move in a direction that can cause a little confusion in the minds of some persons in terms of tooling and the disparity, the discomfort that women experience. All is not lost. A number in today's world I have seen, even with the 511 PPEs are being tailored and uniforms are being tailored to suit women. Boots are now being tailored. So it's important that as you seek your career choices, that you make your representation in such a way as a female to let your upline know that, there are the boots that are made for women, the cuts that are made for women. They are the type of apparel. And therefore, with that demand, you will allow for the industries that are responsible for tailoring and production lines to give strong consideration, because there is a change that is taking place and we have to allow for that. I'll pause there, but I thought I should mention that, especially seeing that some of the tools, some of the equipment cannot be twisted. The hazard dictate how they are built and not necessarily the sexes. That is another key point that I need to mention. Thank you.
Excellent indeed, Allan, and thank you so much. And we have been getting some questions in the chat and via WhatsApp about career choices and career opportunities, and I think Kim has certainly provided some avenues, and you have also as well. So Lisa, would you like to chime in on the question of opportunities for in the emergency communications disaster risk reduction space?
Sure, Robbie. Thank you for the opportunity again. As an emergency communicator and working in the disaster risk reduction field for quite some time, I can tell you that there is opportunity. However, I'm not sure that our women, should I say, are willing to take the risk of taking up those positions. Like we are totally qualified for those positions. There's just no two ways about it. But I'm not sure that women are even thinking of that, taking up that opportunity. And those that do, most of the time, they have to be touched by disaster first. And I find a lot of the times, everyone who is in emergency communications and disaster risk reduction, it's because they have been touched in some form or fashion in each of those fields. So I think that would have brought them on. It's not really something that is spoken about in the open wind, like engineering or like law or like medicine. So I think now, as time moves on and the degrees and the certification is available more in Trinidad and Tobago now, I see we also has a new one coming on board. I think that we can possibly see where the amount of women in the field in any position. Alan, I don't agree with you. Women can do everything and men can do everything with a difference. And that's where I think the two can work together. But anyway, this is what I think. Once those degrees and certification are recognized more in Trinidad and Tobago, I think we'll be seeing a lot more women coming on board. And I really hope that happens soon. Thank you.
Well said indeed, Lisa, and thanks for the insight as well. And hopefully the attendees, many questions that we're getting are from seemingly young persons, young women who are interested in emergency communications and disaster risk reduction areas. And, certainly I think the local institutions, Cipriani Labour College, as well as UTT and UWI, I think they all have some sort of academic program for persons as well. So, excellent fielding of the first rounds of questions. And we do have in the chat a contribution from Jerry. So, of course, that's Jerry David. He says that shelter management graduates amount to 70%. That's 70% women. And CERT volunteers are 65% women. So thanks, Jerry, for providing us with that insight. And we know you have the authority, and that's an authoritative stats that's coming across to us as well. And of course, Jerry David is the head of the, I think, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development as the disaster coordinator or senior disaster coordinator. Hope I got your position correctly there. But thanks so much for that. So let's move to the second question for panelists, and then we will get to some of the participant questions as well. We're doing pretty okay on time. And we want to ask, given what has been said by the panelists and the recognition of the challenges that women face in emergency communications and disaster risk reduction, could the panelists get drilled down into some specifics, some nitty-gritties of what are some of the key challenges that women are currently facing in emergency communications and disaster space? Any of our panelists?
I'll start. I'll just throw out a couple of things just to get the conversation going. One of the things I've heard, Robbie, is bathrooms. Yeah, I've heard this from a number of women, engineers, who have gone out in the field in male-dominated areas, and they have expressed the dramatic impact of either the lack of bathrooms for women, or where it is that the bathrooms are located. Yeah, so this might seem like a simple, insignificant matter, but it's not. It's a matter of policy, and it's a matter of recognition that the workforce, and like Lisa, I disagree a little bit with Allan, but the workforce, there is benefit to having a diverse workforce. And if it is that we recognize this, then we must make sure that we have bathrooms for women, right? So that's one symbolic challenge. It's symbolic. It's actual, but it's also symbolic of the larger issue of accommodations for women. I think that Lisa also mentioned a number in her opening statement, right, about the number of matters that generally women balance, right? In the early days prior to childbearing, there are a set of challenges, but then in the childbearing years, the challenges escalate for women, right? I know, for example, for myself, if I can say so, I have three children, and I breastfed all of them for well over a year, and so there are accommodations. Now you could think, I will be brief, I promise. You could think it's not worth it. It's not worth it for an organization to make accommodations for a woman to breastfeed. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it for many reasons, not only for the woman, but also for the organization and the achievement of organizational objectives. So there are a number of pragmatic issues that are challenges for women. And if it is that a woman, a young woman, looks to the future and thinks about a career choice and feels that accommodations of these sorts will not be made, then despite the fact that she probably beat all the men in her class in math and science in high school, she may choose a different career because the pragmatic issues are just too real. So that's just to get the conversation going. Handing back over to other panelists.
Yes, indeed, and very much nitty-gritty. I mean, we're getting to specifics, and it doesn't get more real than that. And we appreciate you sharing those details with us, Kim. That's exactly what this forum is about. So any of the other panelists would like to, again, we're talking about key challenges, the nitty-gritty, what are women facing out there, that are the key challenges today, that probably it could spark a conversation. Maybe we have engineers, maybe we have planners, maybe we have people who can make a difference, and as Kim said earlier, call to action. So I think that's what we're about to generate. Okay, if people knew these are some of the issues, perhaps there were persons who were not conscious of bathrooms as being an issue. So I think we are starting conversations probably in different quarters. So any other panelists would like to weigh in on any other key nitty-gritty type challenges?
Certainly.
Yes, Allan.
Yeah, I agree in principle with what the arguments laid by my two colleagues, especially their point of view as it relates to some of the challenges that are recognized in terms of inequities. It has been cited by the United Nations that in the disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, that women, girls, and the elderly are somewhat always at a disadvantage. And one may need to ask the question, why? And I have observed, without any prejudice, the war between the hormones in terms of testosterone, the need for it, where it requires it at certain functions, and also the estrogen, or what you may call these battles. And I want to speak a little bit about that, because while we may take it lightly, Jerry would have provided some very, very interesting figures, and I can support it as well. I could point it out that, we have a program here in Tobago called CERT 1000 Strong. We are looking to glean from the communities themselves 1,000, preparing the communities for that, what you may consider to be the catastrophic event that requires numbers in order for you to deal with it. Now, one of the things that I cited very early, while Jerry spoke about the 65% that he had, I am experiencing 78% in terms of the females coming forward. And therefore, I had to say, hold up. We actually, again, the hazard is what dictates tools, equipment, and response capability in terms of their suitability. And from my own perspective, I have to say, we need to target now men. We need the testosterone, because the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that in the field of emergency response, on the other hand, you have a need for what is called heavy lifting. In other words, when I spoke about the real conductor of this band, it is always the hazard. The hazard and the severity of the hazard is what dictates whether trees will fall, whether house roofs will blow off, whether there is huge landslides and debris to be removed. The hazard is the band conductor. And therefore, with that being said, I have recognized as well that, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, that the response element is where you find that the numbers subtly dwindled a little bit. Now, one may say, yeah, there are opportunities for everyone, but the suitability and sometimes the comfort levels are just not there. And I'll give you an example. For example, the diameter hose of a water hose carrying water for the firefighter and can be challenging at a point in time, according to, if you want to look at the averages as relates to the sexes. Now, for example, heavy equipment and the movement of heavy, I have seen it. I've seen the performance level. And it's not to say that it's not to say that it doesn't exist across the sexes, where you can have persons that can apply themselves in the response element as it relates to these heavy lifting requirement based on the impact of the hazard. But what you find is the suitability, the numbers are more readily available on the ground to undertake the task that requires, and I easily say, testosterone. And if so, I shift the argument to justify what sometimes you see happening on the ground itself. And there is an ease in other subject areas that allow for women to perform at their maximum best. And that is something that you cannot discount. It's something that you cannot make a winning argument against. Although, from my own experience as well, I have seen, for example, in the CERT program that we manage here, there are males and there are females. And according to the shift that is working, you may have a young man who is very small in body build, and therefore you may have a woman who is very strong and therefore can undertake the tasking in a particular way. But what is dictating it is not necessarily the choice of sex, but more so the suitability based on what is the challenge to be dealt with. And therefore, where the numbers run, one has to take that into consideration. The other thing is where equipment is concerned, the way in which, as I said, the materials and the components for constructing and manufacturing materials. We still live in a society that homes are built with concrete bricks and homes are built with timber, which carries a particular mass and lengths and things like that. galvanized and roofings are still built in a particular way, which again, so you find there are suitabilities in that favors a particular larger group in the sexes, and so I balance it by saying while there can be accommodation, for example, to suit the sexes, in some areas there are difficulties, especially where equipment, because what is dictating how it's been constructed, how it's been assembled, whether it's made out of steel and cast iron and ore. Those are factors that allow for it to be a challenge to a particular sex. So I rest that there as a counter reality argument. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so sounds like in a court of law, you rest your case. But indeed, thanks very much, Allan. And I think that's the benefit of having a wide cross-sectional viewpoint from our panelists. We getting all sides, especially from a practical standpoint. And we can agree, disagree, and have discussions on the matter. And we really appreciate that. Before I ask before I ask Lisa for her contribution to the question of key challenges, nitty-gritty, I did mention we'll be a little bit informal this evening, right? So I just want to give some shout-outs. I'm seeing quite a few people, many persons who are very familiar to us, right? So I see Kelvin is there. We have Monique, we have Marissa, Carlton, Kaz is here. We have Victor, Vina, you were there earlier. And Jerry, we also saw you there as well. And just want to say thanks so much for your very avid participation on the YouTube live stream. Jerry also added that the disaster management coordinators in Trinidad, 5 of 14 are women, and in terms of field officers, about half of the 42, that'll be 21 or so, are women as well. So some really good statistics to support the discussion there. And Jerry, thank you so much for your input and contribution. So, and also Margaret, welcome as well. Great to have you there. So Lisa, can we have your take in terms of the key challenges, the nitty-gritty as we are today?
You know I'm ready to come on board, especially after the two contributions, my two colleagues that I have the height of respect for. And thank you, Mr. David, for those statistics, because I wanted to actually refer to them, but I didn't have the percentages. So thank you, Mr. David, for sharing that with us today. I was actually going to speak to the we are populated quite a lot with women along by men. And with the field officers, as he clearly said, it's half and half. In the communications field, however, we have, I think it is 3 women out of the 13 disaster units that have communications technicians. So where emergency communications is, it is a little different with regards to, I think once again, I want to refer back to what I said in my presentation. When it comes to that ICT realm, women are intimidated, and I can understand why, because it does intimidate me too, to a certain extent. So the longer I go on and the longer that I stay involved is the more that I learn. But it did hold me back for quite some time. So I think where it comes to emergency communications in particular, that ICT level seems to be a little intimidating for women, and I can speak from experience. So just want to cut off there because I know that we all have some other questions to cover. Thank you, Robbie.
Indeed, Lisa, appreciate your point, that final point that you made, and we did see that well represented in the report that Kim has authored, and under the, I believe it might have been referred to as the digital divide or similar categorization. And we must certainly work at it, recognize where there might be challenges or any imbalance, and us all have an interest in working towards closing these gaps. All right, so we have quite a few comments from persons in the chat. However, we'll just take a couple of the questions that I'm seeing to field to our panelists. And we're not doing too badly in time, so we could probably field about 2 of these questions. And then we will look to begin our wrap-up. So the first question, interesting one. Are women better communicators than men? So who will take a stab at that one?
I think they are.
I want to agree. I don't know if they are better communicators, but I think that when it comes to detail and what needs to be shared, I think women may be a little better. Don't want to sound like I'm being one-sided here, but I think women are a little better with regards to what needs to be shared and where and when. So I think with regards to communications and emergencies, that does come in very handy.
I think wives are probably better than husbands at communicating. So I would avoid making a statement about that personally. I think that both men and women have their strengths and weaknesses, and it really depends on what you're talking about, and there's a large variance. There's such a large variance, as I say, just anecdotally, that wives are probably better communicators than husbands. But back over.
Yeah, I love the panelists' responses to the question, indeed. And I see we have Paula in the chat making a comments and appreciation and so on. And I'll say Paula is one of our React members. I tell you, when she is a net control operator in the radio, it's just, super. And I mean, she happens to be a woman, but that's all I will say on that, right? Okay, the next question I'm seeing here looks like a bit of a controversial question, but we did ask persons to ask any question, right? Once they're respectful. So let's go with this one. I'm not sure who will be able to feel the answer, or maybe we could have a conversation on it. Is there bias in the hiring of female employees in the disaster management organizations in Trinidad and Tobago? So that seems to be a bit of a heavy question, but panelists, how say ye?
Well, if I were to use statistics from a perspective of TEMA, the majority of our staff is females. But I want to qualify the answer again by saying that when you placed an advertisement, the process by which responders or persons to that invitation for filling those vacancies, women respond quite well. And as I indicated early, that this construct or the structure, when you look at the structure of emergency management systems, it's an haven for women to function and do well. And I mentioned straight through, if you look at the incident command structure and you apply to the emergency operations center, it is very easy for women to fit all of the fields quite effectively. And at TEMA, they have done so. The only area that you will find that is very, very, again, it goes back to the testosterone at my angle. For example, in logistics, where warehousing is concerned, that area is 99% male. And one can easily understand that. Why? Again, because it requires heavy lifting. And these are the realities that we have to treat with, that I made the point. So I'll pause there. I think I've said enough. Good.
Well, thanks, Allan. Kim or Lisa, would you care to stab? Again, the question is there bias in the hiring of female employees at the disaster management organizations of Trinidad and Tobago? Kim or Lisa?
I want to make my quick contribution here. I know Alan is referring a lot to the heavy work, but emergency management and disaster risk reduction, there is plenty other things other than the heavy work. And this is why I know that Alan and I could discuss this for the entire weekend. I do that. But I really wanted I don't want people to become discouraged because emergency management is a very big field. And the heavy lifting, it really and truly, I'm not sure, maybe Alan could tell me what is the percentage of, let's say, positions that need to be recognized by the heavy lifting. Because I think that there are many other positions that need to be filled in order to have a positive and a successful outcome to disaster risk reduction and disaster management on the whole. Alan, is there a figure maybe that can qualify your heavy lifting conversation?
I did, Lisa. Maybe you may have missed it. I said 99% of the field at the Emergency Operations Center is easily filled by women, handsomely, because you're dealing with, they are better qualified. They come to the table better qualified, and the fraction of the work to be undertaken at an Emergency Operations Center can be easily be done by women. And I would have mentioned also the field of ICTs. That is an area that they need to explore because that is where some of the higher paying jobs are. And it's nothing beyond. One of our best ICT technicians here at TEMA is actually a female. She gives the men, I will prefer her being behind my computers or doing stuff. She's very, very good. But I did mention that 1% that I speak about in the structure of the Emergency Operations Center, using the ICS model, you will find that in the area of logistics, which undertakes information management, but also in that field have heavy lifting. And this is where that area you find is heavily with men. So I agree in principle that the EOC, which is the coordinating hub of emergency management, is a haven and an easy place for career enthusiasts and persons looking to further themselves in disaster risk reduction to join the disaster management system. There is space for you, and there is opportunities that you will feel very comfortable. There's one other thing that I did not mention, and that is what is happening with the pandemic. Is there a reverse side to it? Yes, there is. Women in the workplace have been heavily impacted by the pandemic. I reiterate again, Mr. Moderator Robbie, that the hazard is really the band conductor in all of this. The hazard dictates it. And when you deal with a pandemic, what we would have observed that the population, and the UN cited it, the population throughout the world, a large percentage is being impacted, but on women are being affected in this way. And it shows up in the workplace where in terms of the numbers, sometimes where children is concerned, the balance between dealing with the kids and their attendance and things like that, there have been challenges as a result of the global pandemic as it impacted women. And that is only one side of a different side of the argument. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have delved into that quite a bit. Kim, I don't know if you wanted to add.
I would like, if I have just, if you give me a minute,
Yes, certainly.
Robbie, I'd like to just mention two things. With respect to the heavy lifting, Alan, thanks for bringing it up, Lisa. I was going to avoid it, but I can't now. So two things with respect to the heavy lifting. One is that when we talk about equality, remember what I mentioned before, that when we talk about equality refers to equal access. Equality does not mean the same number of men and women doing the same thing. Equality does not mean the same number of men and women doing the same thing. It means equal access. So if it is, for example, that you have a specification for a job, and you should, and if it is that a woman can fill that specification, then there should be no bias. Simple as that. It could very well be that the specifications of the job It could well be that simply you cannot find any woman who would apply for the job out of either interest or capability. But you as an organization have a moral responsibility, and increasingly a legal one, to make the opportunity to access that job available equally to all. So that's one thing. That's in terms of equality. So I heard Allan speak on and on about the heavy lifting. I simply want to say, don't forget what equality is. Okay. The second thing is this, Allan. In my opening, I mentioned very many times about the life cycle of communications, in particular, information and communications technology, ICT life cycle. Okay. I spoke very little about the disaster risk management in relation to women, because that, as we've heard, is reasonably well populated with women. But I talked a lot about ICT, and I specifically mentioned several times the issue of design. So a key part of the ICT life cycle is design. And I mentioned that when it is that only 25% of the enrollment in STEM courses at university level are women, and only 33% in research are women. A consequence of that, I mentioned in my opening, is that you will find that many of the tools for all aspects of the disaster risk management cycle and ICT are simply not designed for women. And Allan, I heard you many times mention the gauge of this, and the material that this is made of, and the weight of this, and all of these things. Many of them have to do with the fact that they have not been designed for women. Now, maybe it is, as I said, that no woman would be interested in the job in the first place. But it should not be ever that our instruments and our instrumentation are designed for men alone, or for tall people, or for people of color, or for people who speak English. It should not be. This is a universal design principle, that if it is that you find that the equipment is only accessible to a small portion of the world, then you should go back to the design stage. Back over to you, moderator Robbie.
Indeed, in terms of equity, your points are very well appreciated, Kim, and all panelists as well. I think this is the type of discussion, and judging from the comments in the group, Abraham, glad you could join us, and we certainly are happy for your comments. Abraham is saying that he's glad that we're all thinking about these things as a community, and he appreciates the session. Carlton is saying, that sometimes women in construction outdo men, certainly. Jerry comes in and adds that women do not gravitate to be backhoe operators and excavator operators. They are not drawn to operate chainsaws or forklifts. However, he says no bias. If they meet the requirements and have experience, even if it is volunteering, they are given the opportunity. So thanks for that input as well from our participants, our attendees. So I think we have come to the point where I will ask each of our panelists to give us a quick 2-minute wrap-up, the final comments as we look to wrap this evening's proceedings, and I'll go in the order in which the panelists have made their presentations. So Kim, your closing comments.
So I'll be very brief, yes. I'll end where I start, Robbie, and that's simply a call to action. And the call to action is for all of us to do our part within our sphere of influence. So if it is that you, Robbie, you have very many years of experience with the radio, with the amateur radio and different types of radio, all aspects of radio communications, you, I know, are doing your part. You are doing your part because you provide a tremendous support and mentorship for people who have no idea about radio but are interested to learn and a little anxious and insecure. You take them under your wing and you give generously. And that's what I'm saying, is that this is a call to action for all of us within our spheres of interest to do our part to make sure that emergency communications and disaster risk management is well populated with the workforce that can provide the very best outcomes in each of our ways. So that's it for me. Handing back over to Chair.
Thank you very much, Kim, indeed. Up next, Allan, for your closing comments.
Well, firstly, I want to thank REACT for facilitating this. And it has sharpened my mind in a particular direction. I also want to thank my colleagues who have, in some cases, volunteered arguments that are well placed as it relates to the subject. In closing, I want to encourage women and that as the metamorphosis, as things, the dynamics of things change in the world of emergency management, where ICTs are becoming a major player in all aspects, in all quarters of the operations. It is a field now that allows for women to find their place and demonstrate their strengths, which they are well endowed with. And therefore, I also want to mention the need for disaster risk governance, which will allow for it to be an undertaking in terms of policies and regulations that will allow for equity to be established. And Matthew, I use the word equity against using the word equality, because I understand the both and understand exactly how they apply to emergency management. And therefore, equity in the distribution of resources, be it wages, tasks, things like that. I want to ensure that the right policies are in place for women to function effectively, because one of the key things I want to mention is that of the manufacturing industries around the world that outfit these are governed by the mighty dollar and what the uptake as it relates to the needs of these industries are asking for. That is how they make their dollars and cents. And therefore, I want to encourage women to flood the market by making yourself available. It is not as difficult as sometimes it appears from on the outside, because the ICTs are allowing for what you may consider to be a very, very enabling environment. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Allan. And before I come to Lisa for her closing comments, Angela rather, says our REACT ladies always lift the bar quite well. So love that comment. And just to give some shout outs to Jennifer as well as Jeff, who are in our stream. So Lisa, your closing comments.
That's me. Thank you, Robbie. Well, firstly, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to come in and listen, because I know that this topic is extremely important to many of us. I don't want anyone to be to not think that there is a future for women in emergency management and disaster risk reduction. There is a big place for us, because even though there is much that men can do. Guys, I want you to close your ears. There's much that men can do, but most of the time, women can do it better. And as time goes on, I can tell you, I have seen women jump hurdles and are getting closer and closer to developing that equity, as mentioned by both my colleagues here. And we definitely are equal when it comes to disaster management and emergency communications. We can do it, we can shine, and we definitely have a light that needs to be seen. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, what a group of panelists excellent job indeed in terms of their presentations, comments, and responses. So this has certainly been an engaging and illuminating conversation. So we have come to the time where we need to put a wrap on it. And in closing, we would like to thank the ODPM and TEMA for conceptualizing the NDPPM and putting the overall program together. Special thanks to the CEO of the ODPM, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, Ms. Peters and other ODPM support staff, and Director of TEMA, Allan Stewart, and support staff for their kind assistance and encouragement. A hearty thanks to the panelists, Dr. Kim Mallalieu, Allan Stewart, and Lisa Henzell, who have been excellent orators and have provided us with significant insight. Clearly, further discussion and exploration are warranted. Thanks to all attendees who were part of the live audience and those that fielded questions or comments. A special thanks to our streaming provider, HeartLight TV, and its CEO, Bert Williams, and staff. Of course, we must give a special shout out to Charmaine for making available the required technologies and facilities, enabling us to host today's virtual panel discussion. Thanks to the Chairman and Board of Directors of REACT International, the Presidents and teams of the REACT Trinidad and Tobago Council, REACT members and their families, fellow communicators, colleagues in the amateur radio fraternity, the Zello community, Zello Communications partners, and CB radio operators for their various contributions towards making this event possible. Look out for follow-up sessions in the near future. And this is to answer a question that was asked ad nauseum via WhatsApp. To get in touch with REACT, please call or text our WhatsApp number. That's the same number that was used to send the text. You can provide your contact information. It's 1-868-74-REACT. Or you can simply email us at info@ttreact.com. That's info@ttreact.com. You can also check us out on our social media platforms and consider interacting with us via the public Zello channel, REACT Members. Thank you. Wishing that everyone and their families continue to be safe. We have a rerun of the TikTok video at the end before we bring the stream to an end. Everyone, do have a good night. Thank you. Yeah. If it doesn't, that's okay.